welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Morgan. I am a licensed cosmetologist, professional makeup artist, and lover of theatrics. So being that I am super into theatrics, I'm also a huge movie buff. I love movies. And being that it is the holidays, I thought it would be really fun to do a story time about one of my favorite movies, and that is The Long Kiss Goodnight. This is one of those movies that is criminally underrated in my opinion. It is such a good movie, and it's a perfect kind of kick-ass holiday movie. So if you are into suspense, and if you're into not traditional holiday Christmas movies, I would definitely say give this one a try. And right now, at the time that I'm filming this video, it is on Tubi, so it is completely free. The only thing is you do have to watch some occasional ads throughout the movie, which to me is fine. It's kind of like watching TV except without as many ads as there are usually on TV, but it's one of those hidden gems that I really thought would be a great story time. I'm gonna be going through the entire movie from start to finish, so spoiler alert, if you're one of those people that does not like to hear a movie before you see it, then I would definitely say go check the movie out first and then watch this later. So in the opening scene, we are introduced to Samantha Kane, who is this beautiful brunette bombshell. And she happens to be riding in this Christmas parade as Mrs. Claus. And while she's riding, she's telling the audience a little bit about her story. She's not actually talking to us, but it's as if we're in her head and we're hearing what she has to say. And she tells us that 8 years ago, she woke up on a beach and she was 2 months pregnant with a key in her back pocket that had no numbers on it, and she has all these scars on her body and she has no idea who she is. So over the years, she's hired a bunch of different detectives, starting with really expensive ones, to try and figure out who she is. And then when she gets nowhere over the years, she starts hiring less expensive, cheaper private detectives. And she explains to us that whoever it was that she used to be, that's not who she is anymore. And so she really doesn't care about finding out who she used to be. At this point in Samantha's life, she is Susie Homemaker. She's the perfect mom, the beloved school teacher, and she is dating a really square guy in the neighborhood that is totally normal, and they just seem to be getting along wonderfully. Well, every year they throw a Christmas party, and this year was no exception. They decided to throw a Christmas party, and I'm sure you guys can all relate to this. We all have that uncle or friend that drinks a little too much at parties and gets a little carried away. Well, she had that friend as well, who was over in the corner slurring his words and became a little too intoxicated to drive home. So she says she's gonna drive him home, and on the drive, they get into a horrible car accident. She ends up hitting a deer in the middle of the road. So after they crash into this tree, she gets flung out of the car, and then she starts stumbling up, and she looks over and she sees that the deer is actually still alive. But of course, the deer is in pain and is going to eventually die. So she walks over to the deer, she puts her hands on his antlers and she twists it, and she cracks his neck and puts him out of his misery. So now we as the audience are kind of like, whoa, like that was pretty cool, but a little frightening. Like most of us would not get up and go put a deer out of its misery with our bare hands. So at this point, we're kind of like, okay, there might be something a little off about Samantha. The next scene, we get introduced to Samuel L. Jackson's character, whose name is Hennessy, and he is epic. He curses like a sailor, and honestly, he says MF so much throughout the entire movie, I can't even count how many times he says it. He is this sleazy private detective slash con man who is hired by Samantha Kane to try and figure out who she is and point her in the right direction. At this point in Hennessy's life, he is just scraping by. He doesn't have a whole lot going for him. He does have a son that he has a very, very narrow relationship with, because the mother of his son tries to keep him away from him because she realizes that this guy is no good. So Hennessy has an assistant working for him that happens to catch a lucky break on who Samantha Kane is. She gets some information from her past from a landlord that apparently she had that loved her. And one day she never came back, but the landlord loved her so much she never threw any of her stuff away. Now they have a connection that they might be able to find out who Samantha Kane really is. Now, Hennessy is super excited because he's like, oh, we can go extract some more money from her and tell her that we're doing our job. He plans to go and meet Samantha and tell her what he's found. Well, because Samantha was so beautiful as Mrs. Claus in the Christmas parade, it actually ended up being televised. The next scene, we have an inmate sitting in a prison cell watching the television in a break room. He happens to look over and see Mrs. Claus on the television, and this man absolutely loses his mind. He's crazy, he's deranged, he's missing an eye, and we have absolutely no idea who this guy is, but he's scary, and he sees Samantha on the TV and he loses it. While he's going crazy, they had to end up sedating him. And apparently, under sedation, he said, Charlie Baltimore is alive. And that's when we get introduced to Timothy, who's now been made aware that Charlie might still be alive. So he calls up his goons and he says, tap the old man's phone. Now we don't know what that means, but it's bad news apparently if Charlie is alive. So while Samantha is in the hospital recovering from her injuries due to the accident, she starts having these weird dreams about herself. In the dream, she's looking into the mirror, and in the mirror is herself, and she's bleeding and she's smoking, and it's totally out of character for who she actually is. In the mirror, this person that's her but looks completely different says to her, I'm coming back. You know that, don't you? And so she's freaked out, we're freaked out, and we don't really know what that means. Eventually Sam makes it home, and there's this epic scene where she is preparing a meal. She's cutting some carrots. She's not doing such a great job. She's just like, you know, chop, 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 like a normal person would do. And then all of a sudden, she starts chopping super fast, and her boyfriend and her daughter are looking at her like, whoa, what's going on? And then she becomes excited, and then she's like, I used to do this. I used to be a chef. This is part of my history. So then they all get super excited, and the boyfriend and the daughter chime in, and they're throwing different vegetables at her. Here, chop this up. Here, chop this up. And she's having fun, and she's just chopping away. And then things go a little left. She picks up a tomato in one hand, and then she has a carving knife in the other hand, and she throws the tomato and chases it with a knife, and it ends up landing inside the door of the cupboard. It was perfect. The knife landed perfectly inside the tomato, and everyone just kind of stopped. And she's really excited, and she yells at her boyfriend, chefs do that. And her boyfriend looks terrified, and he's like, no they don't. Fun's over, and they just kind of sweep that under the rug and go on about their day and pretend like that didn't happen. So at this point, Samantha is desperately trying to get back to her normal life, and she says, okay, she's gonna take her daughter ice skating. Well, her daughter ends up falling and hurting her wrist pretty bad. But she didn't realize that she was hurt so bad. She thought she was just being a wimp. And then you see Samantha snap, and like her demeanor changes completely. And she looks at her daughter and she goes, stop being a little baby and get up. And her daughter's like, and she tells her daughter to go and continue skating. So the next scene we see, she's explaining to her boyfriend that she didn't realize that the little girl had actually broken her arm. And she feels terrible, and she cannot remember anything that she said to her. Her daughter's name is Caitlin. And she's just like, I don't know what's going on with me, and she's crying, and she's trying to figure out who she is. Well then, as she's talking to her boyfriend, they both hear carolers in the front of the house, but they're singing really off key, and it sounds kind of odd. So Samantha, being Susie Homemaker, decides that she's gonna go and greet them with a jar of candy. So she walks to the front and she opens the door, and as soon as she opens the door, the crazy guy with the one eye happens to be right behind the carolers holding a gun. So they were a diversion to get her to open up the door, and he walks into the house, and all of the carolers, of course, scatter. They're scared, they're terrified. That's why they were singing off key. And he steps into the house and he looks at her and he goes, I want my eye back, bitch. So he knocks her boyfriend unconscious right away, and then she tries to run up the stairs to where her daughter is, and he blows a huge hole into the wall. Well, after he blows this hole into the wall, immediately Samantha picks up her daughter Caitlin and throws her outside through this hole, and she ends up landing in the tree house, so she's safe. And now her main concern is to try and get away from this guy. She has no idea who he is, but he is chasing her around and he's trying to kill her. So they manage to tussle into the kitchen. He's throwing blows, she's getting beat up. So while they're in the kitchen, she manages to grab this pie, slams it in his face, knocks him kind of unconscious, and then she does this weird kind of karate chop thing in his back while he's on the floor. So we're like, okay. And at this point, her boyfriend has now come to. He comes running into the kitchen. He watches her basically do this karate chop thing, and he's just kind of standing there. And then she proceeds to pick up his neck and crack it so that he dies. And she looks at him with this ominous look, and he's looking at her like, oh my God, who is this woman? Who are you? He knows at this point she is not who he thinks she is. After the fight scene, Samantha snaps out of this insane person again, and she's like, oh my God, Caitlin, she's still outside. She's like, we have to go get her. So she runs outside. Hennessy happens to be there along with a ton of police, and they're all like, what's going on? So she falls to her knees and she just kind of collapses now that she knows everything's okay. So she decides to go with Hennessy to retrieve this box from her old landlord so that she can start to figure out who she used to be. She knows that if she can't figure out who she used to be, she will be in danger and her family will be in danger. Sadly, she says goodbye to her boyfriend, and then she kisses her daughter and she writes "Mommy loves you" on her cast along with her cell phone number, because you have to remember the little girl broke her wrist. So at this point, she's leaving them and she's going to try and figure out who she is. Once they retrieve the box with all of her stuff, she starts going through it and she sees a book. And in this book, there's a note from somebody named Mr. Waldman. And she's like, okay, well, I must have known him. Let me find his number. She retrieves his number, gives him a call, and when she calls him, this man is shocked to hear who the voice is on the other line. She asks him, what's my name? And he says, you don't know who you are? And she says, my name, sir, please tell me. And he says, your name is Charlene Elizabeth Baltimore. You are a spy and you work for the United States government. He tells her, let's meet up tomorrow at this train station and I'll tell you everything. Well, unfortunately, Mr. Waldman happened to be the old man that Timothy was talking about. So his phone was tapped. So they knew about this meeting that was going to take place tomorrow with Samantha and Hennessy. Well, Timothy, of course, knows who Samantha is. When he gets to the train station, he makes this effort to try and bump into her and see if she recognizes him. So he goes up to her and says, oh, excuse me, do we know each other? And she looks completely shocked, and she genuinely does not know who this guy is. And so he's like, okay, well, I guess my mistake. You really don't know who I am. With that information, he now knows that Samantha has no idea of her past. But him being the bad guy still orders a hit on her and Hennessy. He calls up his goons and he says, take him out. So now Samantha sees this older guy walking towards them and she's like, oh, I think that might be Mr. Waldman. And then immediately this guy reaches into his coat pocket and instinctively she knows he's going to grab his gun. Hennessy happened to be carrying a gun in his pocket as well. So without even thinking about it, she reaches her hand into Hennessy's pocket, aims the pocket, and shoots the guy before he can take out his gun. And at this point, everything goes crazy. It's like, whoa, okay? Like, we know, instinctively, she knows what she's doing. So now they know that they have to get out of there. She runs up to the guy that she just shot, takes his machine gun, and now they book it. And they run immediately up the stairs to try and escape all the other goons that have come in to try and take them out as well. So they end up upstairs in this hallway and they're both looking at each other like, what do we do? And next thing they know, there is a grenade that somebody has thrown next to them to take them out. So she grabs Hennessy's gun, points it at a window down the hall, and poof, she shoots the window out, and they both start running towards the end of the hall. And they jump out, not knowing what's on the other side. When they jump out, they see this whole landing with snow covering it. So she immediately takes her machine gun and starts spraying these shots all around the snow. As it turns out, there was water underneath it. So while she is shooting up all the snow, she's breaking up the ice so that when they land, they can fall in water. And they do, and they survive. They're cold, they're soaking wet, but they're alive. They managed to make it up the steps, and Mr. Waldman happens to see them and comes charging right in front of them with his car, and he tells them to get in. And she's looking at him like, we don't know who you are. He says, get in now, we don't have time, I'll explain everything on the way. So they do. They get in the car and they start driving, and he starts to explain who she actually is. So he tells her once again that you are a spy working for the United States government, and your father used to be a part of the service too. When he was killed, the agency recruited you, and he tells her that I was the one that trained you. That's how I know who you are. Hennessy at this point is starting to get super suspicious. He's looking at this guy like, are you kidding me? This is this teacher slash housewife, Susie Homemaker, and you're telling me she's a spy? Get out of here. He doesn't trust him at all. Well, eventually Mr. Waldman will pull over the car. He has some clothes in the trunk that he gives them so that they can change out of their wet clothes and start to get dry. So he starts questioning Mr. Waldman like, if all this is true, then how did they happen to know that we would be at the train station? And Mr. Waldman tells them, well, they tapped my phone. He was like, I know it sounds crazy. He was like, yeah, it's impossible. How would they know to tap your phone? And he doesn't believe him. And then Hennessy throws his coat over Mr. Waldman's head, takes a crowbar, hits him slightly, and then him and Samantha get in the car and they book it and they leave Mr. Waldman there. So at this point, Samantha's like, I need some answers. If Mr. Waldman is telling me a whole big kooky story, I need to find somebody else from this box who's gonna tell me who I actually am. And they come across somebody and their address, so they drive out to meet this guy. As they drive up, they see this man walking on his farm, and immediately Samantha's like, I know this guy. I know details about him. I know that he doesn't own a TV. I know that he likes horses. I know this, I know that. And she's telling Hennessy this, and she's like, I think that he was my fiance. We have to go up and say hi. So Hennessy reluctantly is like, okay, fine. He grabs his gun. She walks right up to him and she's like, hi, my name is Samantha and I think I was gonna marry you. It's just this really cute moment, but it's a little weird. And so he goes, Charlie, and he gives her a big old hug. Eventually Hennessy lets his guard down and he lets them talk by themselves. Well, as they're off chatting, Hennessy is doing his own thing at the other end of the farm, and who happens to stumble upon him? None other than Mr. Waldman. Mr. Waldman found them from a note that I guess apparently he had left behind, and so he knew exactly where they were going to be. So Mr. Waldman is talking to Hennessy and he's like, why are you guys here? And he said, oh, you know, that's her old fiance. And the guy goes, no, it's not. He was a target. That's why she knows all this personal information about him, because she was gonna kill him. So now both of them are running down the farm. They're like, hey, Charlie, Samantha, Charlie. And they're trying to get her attention so that they can tell her to get away from this guy. Well, as they do, helicopters roll in. The guy happens to have a gun. He knocks Samantha out and they capture Hennessy and Mr. Waldman. So when Samantha wakes up, we see that she is tied to this wheat mill. And one hand is here, one hand is here, and one leg is there, and one leg is there. And she's just suspended on this thing that gets lowered in and out of this freezing water at will. Of course, they start questioning her. Why are you here? Why have you resurfaced after 8 years? What is it that we need to know? Tell us everything. And they start questioning her, and she's like, listen, I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm just a school teacher trying to figure out who I actually am. Please let me go. And of course, they're not buying it. So they lower her into the cold water. And who happens to be next to her in this cold water? Well, it's Mr. Waldman. And of course, he's dead. They killed Mr. Waldman. They took him out. And she is terrified. So now they wheel her back up and they ask her the same question again. They're like, tell us what you know, tell us why you're here, or we're gonna put you back in that water. So she's like, listen, I really have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know who I am. I am here trying to figure out who I am. And so again, they lower her into the freezing water. And this time, they leave her a little bit longer. At this point, she almost passes out, and you see her starting to kind of get hazy. And that's when everything snaps. She starts remembering who Charlie Baltimore is. Everything starts coming back. So when they raise her up again, she is this completely different person, and she lets out this blood-curdling scream, and she's like, ah, and she's like, I'm back. So they look at her and they say, again, why are you here? And she, at this point, is not interested in talking with them, and she's not interested in telling them, I don't know anything. I don't know what you're talking about. She looks at them and she goes, I let you touch me, cowboy. I think I need a bath. One of the most epic lines of the movie. They proceed to lower her back down into the freezing cold water. Well, she remembered that Mr. Waldman kept a spare gun inside his pants close to his, and so she manages to wrangle her one hand free. She grabs it right before they start to wheel it back up, and as they are wheeling it back up, her arm is ready out of the water, and she shoots the guy in the knee, and then she shoots the machine to stop it in place so that it won't keep rolling up, and she manages to let herself go free. And now Charlie Baltimore has entered the room. And then the next scene, we see her in a hotel room, and she cuts off all her hair. She's bleached her hair. She gives herself a smoky eye and a nice nude lip, hence the look today. And she is Charlie. And Hennessy is just like, whoa, lady, this is a little too much for me. Yesterday you were a school teacher, and today you are an assassin, and you're freaking me out. So she actually starts coming on to Hennessy, and in a bizarre twist, he actually becomes the voice of reason in this situation. He's like, what are you doing? I know the reason that you're trying to sleep with me. It's because you're trying to erase who you used to be. And Samantha gets pissed off, and she's like, I never wanted to have a kid. Samantha wanted to have a kid. I never wanted this life. And she storms out from the hotel room to make a call. She calls her old boss, Mr. Perkins, to say that she's ready to come back in and that she wants to talk. So this was also an attempt to set a trap for Mr. Perkins and see if he actually wanted her to come back or if he wanted her dead. So of course, it turns out Mr. Perkins is not such a great guy, and he actually does want her dead, and goons show up to try and kill her. Of course, she was expecting it, so she takes them out in this super badass scene, and it's great. I'm not going to spoil the scene for you. I'm just going to say you have to watch it because it's pretty cool. Then she says to Hennessy, all right, I have to get out of the country. I have to start a new life, and you're going to help me do it. That blank key that was in my back pocket 8 years ago leads to a locker, and in the locker, there is a ton of money and a new identity for me to take once I leave this country. Unfortunately, the key is not with her. She left the key at home with her daughter on a charm bracelet for her daughter to remember her. So she goes back to the house, and while she's there, she happens to look out and see her daughter through one of her lenses, and she sees her daughter at a Christmas party. That's when everything starts to click, and she realizes, you know what, I am a mom, I do love my daughter, I can't go anywhere, I need to stay. So they do still need to retrieve the money, so her and Hennessy make it on the road, and they start driving along with the intent to go open up this locker. Well, next thing you know, Mr. Timothy is giving her a call on her cell phone, and he says, I've got your kid. If you want to see her alive, then you need to meet me at this place at this time. Well, her and Hennessy had a better plan. They're like, okay, well, we can find out where he is. We can run a trace on his phone. So they managed to run a trace on his phone and figure out where he's kept her daughter. So Charlie knows that this is a suicide mission. She knows that she's most likely not going to make it out of this situation alive. However, it's her daughter and she has no other choice. So they make it to the compound where her daughter is. She manages to retrieve her child, and then they find Hennessy hiding in the bushes, and the jig is up. They capture her, they capture her daughter, and they capture Hennessy as well. His way of torturing Charlie and her daughter is to lock them in a freezer and have them freeze to death. But before he goes, Charlie looks at Timothy and she says, look into the little girl's eyes. He's like, okay. So he goes and he looks into the little girl's eyes, and he realizes they're his eyes. She said, the kid is yours. Do what you want with me, but let her live. And Timothy is like, no, I'm gonna give you some quality time to spend with your daughter while you both die. And so she's like, okay, well, since I'm gonna die, why don't you tell me what you're doing? What is this plan? What's so top secret? And why are you guys trying to kill me? Timothy explains that they are trying to extract money from the government by setting up this false terrorist attack. They have a truck outside with a bomb in it that's supposed to detonate in the middle of this town and take out 4,000 people so that they can get government funding. So it was a really sick, twisted fundraiser. And that's why Mr. Perkins was in on it, because Mr. Perkins was the government official and Timothy is the bad guy that can make all of this happen. So she finally understands. Before Timothy closes the door to the freezer, she looks at him and she says, "You're gonna die screaming and I'm gonna watch." And it's just such a badass line, and you know she means it. So of course, her being the skilled assassin and spy that she is, she manages to get out of the situation, and at the same time that she blows up this building and makes her exit, she happens to also set Hennessy free, because the blast of the explosion exploded all the way up through the building and blew Hennessy back out through the window, and she happened to save his life. She grabs her kid and she runs out the front door, and they're trying to sneak out and not be noticed. Well, of course, bad guys spot her. They start shooting at her. She tells her daughter to run and find a good hiding space and get out of the way. Well, of course, the kid runs right to the truck, where on the side of the truck there is this storage bin, and the kid happens to hide right in there, not realizing, of course, that the truck is a bomb. So Hennessy sees her run towards the truck, and in a moment of bravery, he's like, you know what, I'm gonna do one good thing in my life and I'm gonna save that kid. So he picks up his gun and he starts shooting at the bad guys in an attempt to make a run for Caitlin and get her out of this storage box. Well, unfortunately, they get him. He gets shot multiple times, and you see him fall right next to a truck that was supposed to follow behind the other truck that has the bomb in it once they take it into town. Charlie happens to apprehend a car and run after the truck. She happens to hop in, take the driver out, and get a hold of the truck. And now she's trying to take the truck out of the town so that it doesn't blow up these 4,000 people and save her kid. Which, of course, she does manage to get it out of the town, and she takes it to this abandoned bridge that I guess that they were working on, that they weren't quite finished yet. At this point, Timothy is pissed off. She has ruined the entire plan. There's no way that the truck can go back into town because the truck is now flipped over. When she was driving the truck, the only way to stop it, it had no brakes, was to crash into something. So she crashed into something and the truck landed on its side. So the bomb is still there, but it stopped and it can't go anywhere else. So as soon as the truck stops, Timothy is ready for her. He is ready to kill this woman and take her out because she has just been a thorn in his side and he can't seem to get rid of her. A fight ensues. They scuffle back and forth, and somehow Charlie manages to knock Timothy in the water. After she does that, she immediately runs to grab Caitlin. She gets her out, and right after she gets Caitlin out of the box, well, guess who conveniently shows up in a helicopter? Timothy! And Timothy's still pissed. And at this point, he's got height and multiple guns, and he's shooting at her, and he's shooting at Caitlin. And at this point, Charlie is like, I don't know what to do. So she calls out to the crowd of goons on the other end, and she's like, listen, you guys can do what you want with me. Get my kid out of here. She's innocent. She needs help. And they respond by saying, yeah, ma'am, we understand your request, but we're not gonna help you. We're not gonna do that. The next scene, we see Hennessy, who we thought was dead. Hennessy happened to crawl his way into the other truck that was supposed to be tailing them, and in that truck was a car. So Hennessy gets in the car and he books it out of the truck, makes a run down this bridge to grab Samantha and her daughter. He gets to Samantha and he gets to Caitlin. And so Samantha looks at Hennessy and she says, take my daughter, keep her in the car. And she knows that this is not gonna be over until Timothy is dead, because he will just keep coming after her. So now that Caitlin is out of the way, Charlie sees this perfect opportunity to finally get Timothy. Next to her, there was this rope that was kind of across this scaffolding. So on one end, there is this dead body that she shot at that caught on fire, and at the other end, I guess it's just dangling. So she grabs a hold of the rope, cuts it so that the body weight of the person attached to it will drag it down and lift her up at the same time. She grabs the gun from the guy who is burning and deceased, and she holds it up to Timothy, and at this point they are about the same level, and she happens to fire right at Timothy, and she says, "Die screaming." And Timothy does. He ends up falling out of the helicopter and onto the truck that of course has the bomb in it. So the next thing you see, she's sliding down this rope as fast as she can to try and make it into the car with Hennessy and her child so they can book it out of there before the bomb goes off. And right in the nick of time, they are able to make it across the other bridge when the bomb goes off. There's cars flying and there's debris, but they manage to make it across and they are still alive. And her and Hennessy look like they are inches from death. Hennessy looks so defeated, and Samantha looks over at him and says, "Hey there, did you forget we're rich?" And she pulls out her key, and they know that they're gonna be just fine. So they both get national recognition for saving this town. The President of the United States personally calls up Charlie Baltimore to ask for her to come back into the service and say thank you so much for saving the town and exposing the crooked people that I had working for me. She says, "Thank you so much for the offer, but I'm doing just fine. I don't want to get back into the service." And she and her boyfriend live happily ever after, and Hennessy also lives happily ever after. And that's how the movie ends. So in my opinion, guys, this movie was epic. It had all of the right ingredients. It had the perfect script. It had the perfect cast. It had enough suspense, enough to keep you invested in it. And Gina Davis's character was amazing. The way that she was able to pull off this Susie Homemaker character into this badass spy and be believable as both characters was just amazing. And I think this film is so slept on. So if you guys are looking for a great holiday movie, I definitely recommend it. And let me know what you guys think about it. Let me know your thoughts. And with that, I think that's gonna kind of wrap up this video. Happy holidays. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this story time with me. And if you did, will you please do me a favor and give me a big thumbs up, and also consider subscribing to my channel if you enjoy this kind of content. I upload weekly, and I'd love to see you guys next week. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.